It's back to school this week. Here in Westminster College, there is a compulsory topic on the curriculum. Migration studies with a special module on small boats. As far as the public's concerned, the government's going to have to resit its exams. A summer of demonstrations outside asylum hotels has left party leaders scrambling to catch up with a furious public mood. But there's more trouble ahead for the Chancellor. According to campaigners, 100 more British children are falling into poverty every day. Will she lift the two-child cap on benefits? And an exclusive interview with the leader of our national church pits the government against potentially its most formidable foe yet, God. We'll be joined live by the Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson. We'll bring you that exclusive interview with the Archbishop of York and acting head of the Church of England, Stephen Cottrell. We'll get reaction from the Deputy Leader of Reform, Richard Tice, and the Conservative Shadow Cabinet Office Minister, Alex Burghart. Plus, with us throughout the show, former Financial Times editor, Lionel Barber. Former Boris Johnson advisor, Joe Tanner. And journalist and broadcaster, Steve Richards. Welcome back to Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. It's a lovely thing when neighbours exchange gifts. For example, this morning, the French government's wrapping up the Bayeux tapestry in preparation for sending it to the British Museum. It'll be great for the many hundreds who've turned out this summer to demonstrate outside asylum hotels to have such an epic visual reminder of the last time several thousand young men left the French coast and landed on British shores without so much as a by your leave. They came and they stayed. 950 years later, we've learned our lesson, apparently, and we're just not having the whole William the Conqueror experience again. So in return for French generosité, we'll be sending something back. 2,000 people who've crossed the channel in small boats during the next year. Keir Starmer says that if you arrive illegally, you'll be detained and deported. A message identical in substance to the one delivered earlier in the week by the leader of Reform, Nigel Farage. Kemi Badenoch wants to be even tougher. But this happy harmony is this morning about to be shattered by a critic that no politician really wants to take on. Someone in politics once famously said, "We don't do God." But God, or at least his representative on earth, is certainly doing politics. The Archbishop of York weighs in this morning on migration, taking aim first at Mr. Farage.
We should actively resist the kind of isolationist, short-term, knee-jerk, send them, in this case, send them home. Mr. Farage is saying the things he's saying, but he is not offering any long-term solution to the big issues which are convulsing our world, which lead to this. I see no other way.
He also lambasts the government over the two-child cap on benefits, calling its retention shaming. His criticism is endorsed by 37 other faith leaders in a letter to the Prime Minister and Chancellor today. So expect to hear that message repeated in 1,000 churches, mosques, synagogues and temples this week. Is politics ready to take on the Almighty? Let's find out. Much more of the Archbishop a little later, but let's start this morning with the government. And I can speak now to the Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, who's here. Good morning.
Hello, morning.
The Archbishop says that the Reform's policies of immediate detention and deportation are isolationist, knee-jerk and so on. Prime Minister said yesterday that if you come to this country illegally, you will face detention and return. What exactly is the difference between Sir Keir and Mr Farage's policies?
The fundamental difference is that Reform and Nigel Farage want to provoke anger, but they don't actually want to sort the problems that we face in front of us. So what we're clear about is that in order to retain public confidence in the system, it has to be fair, it has to be humane. Where people don't have the right to be here, of course we'll take action to remove them. And removals are up under this government. But alongside that, we've always had a proud tradition in this country of supporting those facing persecution. But in order to maintain that tradition, the tradition that the British people have always demonstrated, then absolutely we do need to make sure we've got control of our borders. And under the Conservatives, we saw a big increase in the use of asylum hotels, for example. We saw big increases in the number of people crossing the Channel. Now, that's something that's built up over many years. It's not going to be quick and easy to fix, but we will.
Well, that's the past, and that is also about motivation. But what is the difference between what you would actually do? Sir Keir's words, detention and deportation, are almost exactly the words that Mr Farage uses.
Well, of course, we will make sure that people who have no right to be in this country are removed from this country. That's right. It's what people expect. It's what this government will deliver. But alongside that, what you have to do is deal with the huge backlog, process cases more quickly, and make sure that people aren't left around for months and years on end in expensive accommodation. It's all very good and well for reform to chase headlines and whip up that kind of anger.
You're criticising...
Because they don't actually want to fix it. It's in their interest
You're criticising the past.
To fix it.
You're criticising the past, you're criticising reform, but numbers coming across the Channel are up to record level at this time of the year, under you, and actually there's no sign of the gangs being smashed. In fact, the average number of people coming on a boat has climbed under your administration. So let me ask you again. And this is a straightforward thing. There doesn't have to be a problem with it. There is really no difference between what you're saying and what Mr Farage is saying, is there?
Well, the difference is we'll actually take action to do it. It's one thing to provoke anger, and I understand the frustration. I understand the frustration that people feel, because I understand when they see, for example, asylum hotels and big numbers of people in their community, I understand how that can make people feel. Of course, there can be no excuse for what is rightful protest overstepping the mark. But Nigel Farage and Reform, they don't actually want to sort this problem. It is in their interest. They think their political interests are served by whipping up anger rather than fixing problems.
You keep saying they're whipping up...
them and us is that we'll fix this.
You keep saying they're whipping up anger. The anger is there already. You see it in Epping, we see it in Diss, we see it in other places. Let me ask you this. There is a difference between you and Mr Farage. He says that he's happy to change the law or leave international conventions to achieve his ends. Put it another way, he means what he says, and you don't.
We do believe there needs to be reform of the ECHR, and that's what the Home Secretary is looking at. But we also believe as a government that our responsibilities under international law matter too, and our standing in the world matters as well. And that's why, yes, we have to have clear control over our own borders, a fair system with rules that are followed, and we will act to remove people who don't have a right to be here. But as with all of this,
to be
what
clear,
Nigel Farage overlooks is that migration
let's
has
forget him for a minute. Let's talk about you.
My view is that migration has always been an important part of our national story, that the British people have demonstrated enormous generosity over many, many periods of time. Look at the approach that we took to Ukrainian refugees.
I just want to get something clear about what...
In order to maintain that, we have to have clear enforcement of the rules.
To be clear, what you've just said is that you want to see changes in the European Convention of Human Rights.
The Home Secretary has committed to looking at the Article 8 provisions to seeing whether they need updating and reforming for the modern age. Yes, that's right. She said that's something that we are considering.
Are you ready that if you discover that it's not possible to make those changes, because nobody else agrees, to leave the ECHR or to suspend its use, as some of your colleagues who are Home Secretaries in the Labour Party want to do?
I think that's rather getting ahead of ourselves, given that we have the work around the ECHR, and we do believe that work can be undertaken in order to...
You say getting ahead of ourselves. You had a year. I mean, you've got to get on with it.
You just jumped ahead. So I just said we're committed to reforming Article 8 and looking at the changes that are needed. Let's do that and see where that gets to then leap ahead and with the kind of extrapolation that you've made there, I think is a bit much.
I'll tell you why this is an issue. The Prime Minister says that it may be time to negotiate, or that you were saying, that we may need to think again about the ECHR. But the Prime Minister says, and I'm quoting him here, people who say that it may be time to renegotiate or suspend compliance with the ECHR are not serious people, including, and this is me, including people like Sir Malcolm Rifkind, and the former Labour Home Secretaries David Blunkett and Jack Straw. The Prime Minister is saying people who want to reform, change, renegotiate, suspend the ECHR are not serious people. Now, which is it?
So we have been clear, the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister alike, that we're going to look at Article 8 of the ECHR around the right to family life and how that is being applied by the courts. But yes, our standing...
And changing the ECHR won't, as he suggests, put us in the same moral camp as Vladimir Putin.
Look,
that's what the Prime Minister said.
Our standing in the world matters. If we want to strike trade deals with countries, and we've had great success in recent years in striking those trade deals in the last year, then we need to be a country that's taken seriously. We need to be a country that honours our obligations and honours the rule of law. Those are important principles. So we talk about, what the British people...
To be taken seriously, it'd be a good idea if we controlled our own borders, wouldn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And that's what the British people want to see. That's what we're committed to delivering.
And we're not doing it. Numbers are going up.
One of the strongest traditions that we've always had as a country is around the rule of law. That matters. It matters that we have clear enforcement at the border. It matters that we have a clear set of rules around migration. We are toughening those up. The action that the Home Secretary has set out already on this around enforcement, we've removed more people this year who don't have the right to be here. We're processing more cases of asylum seekers more quickly. It is the reason that we're spending so much money on unsuitable accommodation, like hotels, is because for years what the Conservatives did was allow these cases to stack up. It's not right and proper. It's not fair. No,
you say that, but here's the problem. You say you want to get people out of asylum hotels, but you went to court this week to keep an asylum hotel in Epping open. Can you see why, for the average person, it's not clear what you're actually for? You say one thing, but you do another.
I don't want to see large numbers of people accommodated in asylum hotels. I understand how frustrating it is, and I understand how the impact that can have on local communities. That's why we are committed to ending the use of asylum hotels by the end of the Parliament. But we've got to do that in an orderly way. We can't end up with hundreds of people just out on the street because a hotel has closed. So yes, we'll do it. We'll do it carefully, we'll do it properly, and we will do it in an orderly way.
Is it Minister's view, as is said in the Home Office's submission to the judges on appeal, that the rights of asylum seekers trump the interests of local people who do not want those hotels to be open? It says so in the Home Office's submission. Do ministers agree that the rights of asylum seekers trump those of local people?
What we believe is that the Home Secretary and the government have a responsibility to make sure that we are doing our job in processing cases, in accommodating those in the interim who've come to our country. The decision that we saw arising out of the Epping case would have had bigger consequences right across the country that would have led to wider consequences in terms of disruption that would have caused. Look, it's far from ideal. Look, I don't want to be in the place of defending it.
That's what the judges said, but that's not an answer to the question I asked you. Do you agree with the Home Office's submission that the rights of asylum seekers are more significant, more material than the interests of local populations? It
is about a balance of rights. When people come to this country and claim asylum, we have a responsibility as a government to assess their cases and to process them. For those who have got a clear right to be here, for those who have evidenced what they are facing in terms of persecution, refugees, then that will be decided. Where they don't, then we will take action to remove people from the country. So we do have a responsibility to process those cases. And yes, to
the
provide,
responsibility to those asylum seekers is more important than the responsibility to those who live locally.
Our responsibility to those who live locally is also important as well. And I completely understand why many people in places like Epping, where hotels have opened up, feel incredibly frustrated about that. They have a right, of course, to demonstrate lawfully and peacefully. Of course, where it crosses a line, that isn't consistent with our long-standing traditions in this country of respect for the rule of law, respect for the police, and our responsibility to make sure that we have safe communities for everybody living there. And given what is alleged to have happened in Epping, I appreciate this is an ongoing case, so I won't go too far in saying much about this. Given what is alleged to have happened, I can understand the concern that causes to local residents.
And can you understand that what you've just said, to someone who lives in one of these towns, Epping or Diss or wherever it is, you said that it's the government's responsibility to balance the rights, as they would put it, of people who've just arrived, made no contribution to this country, against the rights of those who've lived here forever, who pay their taxes, who want their towns to be safe and tranquil. And your view is that these two things, these two sets of people, are equivalent, and you can balance the rights. Can you see how infuriating that must feel to somebody in one of these towns?
I completely understand how frustrating and how angry people will often feel about the use of asylum hotels.
No, that's not what I'm asking about. I'm asking about your view that their interests have to be balanced. That's a different question. Can you see how people would be angry about that?
I do, and we wouldn't be starting from here. Look, I don't want to be in the position of having a number of asylum hotels across the country in operation. That number is coming down. We've got much further to go, and we will close them by the end of this Parliament. And I know people don't like us, even a year in, as a government, saying, this is what we inherited. This is what we inherited, right? There was a widespread use of asylum hotels by the Conservatives that increased enormously at enormous cost to the taxpayer.
Yeah, you keep going back to the Conservatives.
I wanted to ask you... Yes, but it won't be a quick fix. We will sort it.
Your lawyers, under your guidance, have said in terms that the rights of asylum seekers are more important than the rights of local people in Epping Forest. Would you at least acknowledge that that is what they will hear? And it's up to you. Ministers can say, we agree with that, or we don't agree with it. You can't simply say, let's balance things. Do you agree with what your lawyers said, or don't you?
Yes, of course we do. But what I would add is that whilst I recognise the quite obvious and legitimate concerns that people have about use of asylum hotels, had we not acted in the way that the Home Secretary did around that case, we would have ended up with lots of disruption in terms of what that would have meant around asylum hotels. We will close them, but we will close them in an orderly way, not just where we turf people out on the streets in significant numbers.
All right, let's turn to your own specific area of responsibility. Last year, for the election, you promised that you'd set out and deliver a strategy to end child poverty by spring. Well, that's been delayed. The Archbishop of York describes that delay, called a failure, as, I'm quoting him here, as hugely frustrating and deeply shaming. He's frustrated. Are you ashamed?
I'm ashamed of the very high numbers of children growing up in poverty that we see in our country, so I understand the Archbishop's challenge around bringing those numbers down. It's what I came into politics to do. It's what I believe very strongly, that the family that you're born into, family circumstance, shouldn't determine everything you go on to achieve. It's why we've already taken action as a government. New free breakfast clubs, the childcare expansion that rolls out from tomorrow, 30 hours of government-funded childcare for working parents. And alongside that, just recently we announced the single biggest expansion of free school meals to all families in receipt of universal credit. That will lift 100,000 children out of poverty. But do I accept the challenge that there is more to do on bringing those numbers down further? Yes, I do, and I agree, and this government will deliver that.
I sat with the Archbishop this week and talking to some charity leaders in Middlesbrough area, you know well. It was really interesting. He talked about Church of England schools, where children come to school with empty lunch boxes. They get breakfast, thanks to the breakfast clubs. But then they fill up their lunch boxes at the food bank in the school, or else they'd have no tea when they get home. He thinks that points to and demands the lifting of the two-child cap on benefit, because he and others think that is the main driver for child poverty. Are you ready to lift that two-child cap yet?
So as part of the work that you mentioned that I'm leading with the Work and Pensions Secretary on the child poverty strategy, of course we're looking at every way that we can lift more children out of poverty. That does extend to social security measures alongside that. It's not the only way we can lift children out of poverty, and of course it does come with a big price tag. But we know that not acting also comes with serious consequences and impact too. So for those individual children, poverty blights life chances, it holds people back, it's a moral scar on our country, but it damages us all, because as a society, as a country, we're less productive, our economy is weaker. So of course there are choices. The choices we've made already around expanding free school meals, for example, will make a big difference. The free breakfast clubs will make a really big difference. And the changes we're making around cutting the costs of school uniform to parents at the start of coming in from next year alongside that too. So we've already made a lot of progress. But yes, I accept that over many, many years, what we've seen is a big increase in the number of children growing up in poverty. Growing up, I experienced some of that myself, so I know what it feels like. I know the damage
it's going to be
it has.
higher at the end of this Parliament, according to the Child Poverty Action Group.
Well, that is obviously depends upon wider and further government action.
OK. Oh, what would that be, that further government action?
Well, for example, the changes that we're bringing in from tomorrow around access to childcare. Working parents will be able to access 30 hours of government-backed childcare. One of the biggest barriers around child poverty is skills, access to work and other challenges.
Can I just very quickly ask you about a thing that you're talking about today and you've been talking about the last couple of weeks, and that is the poor performance of white British children on free school meals. And you were talking today about the absence rates. I looked at the official statistics, the ONS statistics, and the problem isn't universal. Gypsy and traveller children, 3 times likely to be missed classes as the average, but Chinese children are less than half as likely. Something similar for black Africans. What should we learn from those communities?
I mean, this is a complex area. I think that, as you say, the numbers speak for themselves, and particularly where it comes to white children on free school meals. The challenge we see around attendance, around doing well in their GCSEs, is a real one, and I'm determined to grasp it. We'll be setting out more later on this year through the school's white paper. But I think what I see in my own community in the North East, where some of these challenges are really profound, is whether families and whether young people really see the full benefit and value of education, whether they see doing well at school as the route to a good life. Because some of these challenges also are about access to good jobs, about the labour market, and on attendance. Okay. You know, this is the start of the new school term is starting. It's an exciting opportunity to really focus on what we can do together, parents, government, and schools, and it's why we're putting more money into backing schools around attendance and behaviour, particularly in some of those communities where we see the greatest of challenges.
Bridget Phillipson, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Well, it's not just schools back from summer tomorrow. Parliament reopens for business too. And who better to start your mornings with than our very own Sam Coates and Politico's Anne McElvoy. Politics at Sam and Anne's returns tomorrow with your daily dose of the day ahead in politics. And it drops every morning at 7:45. You can scan the QR code now to get in on the action. Well, there's a lot more to come on this show this morning. You've already heard a snippet of what the Archbishop of York had to say about Nigel Farage's migration policies. We're going to bring you the rest of that interview a little later in the programme. Reform's Deputy Leader Richard Tice is going to give us his reaction to the Archbishop of York at the top of the hour. That's 9 a.m. And we'll also hear from Conservatives with Shadow Cabinet Office Minister Alex Burghart. Well, let's see what our all-star panel made of what we've heard so far from the Education Secretary. We're joined all morning by the former Financial Times editor, Lionel Barber, the former Boris Johnson advisor, Joe Tanner, and journalist and broadcaster, Steve Richards. Morning all, and welcome back. Lionel, what did you make of what the Education Secretary had to say about the migration issue?
More than a few tortured responses, I would say, to your question.
Torturing, I think, is harsh.
Oh, well,
harsh. I'm very kind.
Yeah, someone sharpened their pencils.
Even off your summer break. No, I mean, I think this question of the balance between the interests of the local community and the rights of asylum seekers, we should call them, by the way, not asylum seekers, but in large part economic migrants. I mean, this is the problem. I think, obviously, the headlines, the pictures, day after day of ordinary people protesting, British flags out. I mean, we've reached a complete impasse. There needs to be new thinking. You and I were talking just before the break about how the terms of debate have shifted. So what previously appeared to be off the agenda, no question of, say, coming out or suspending parts of the European Convention on Human Rights. That is now part of it. Now, very briefly, because it's a complex issue, that's not going to solve the problem. Just withdrawing. There would be some opprobrium, criticism. That's not the part of it. What they have to do is process these applications much faster. And I think some new thinking. Trevor, you heard it here first. I think they should consider following what some European countries do and put these people to work.
Asylum seekers, as most people don't know, asylum seekers are not allowed to work at the moment, which is partly why they languish in these hotels. Jo, what do you make of it?
I think there's a frustration growing from the public, we know. But surely the crux of one of those frustrations was in the words that Bridget Phillipson repeated over and over again, which was will. We will do this, we will look at that. The problem is this government came in with a plan for change, and yet it does not appear to have a plan or, quite frankly, any idea what to do to solve this problem. And instead, the gulf between the expectations of the public and the frustrations of the public and where the government are in terms of answers is just growing. It's growing every week. We saw over the summer Reform managing to capitalise on the fact that there was a complete void, really, at the heart of government. We didn't really hear much at all in terms of policy. It was sort of left as everyone wanted to have a break. And actually, quite frankly, this is the first day back, and the person that is out on the airwaves is Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary. Where is the Home Secretary? Where is the more senior leadership? And I've got nothing against Bridget, as a member of the Cabinet, but surely this is the big issue that people are bothered about and is the first thing that people are talking about. And the story today is we're worried about education attainments and absence of
That is the government's press release this morning.
And that's the joke of it. Surely, if you had a plan, you shouldn't be talking about what we will do in the future. We should be hearing about what is actually going to be happening tomorrow, the day after that, to make a difference to these communities.
Steve, are they missing a trick here?
Well, I think there are two levels. On the presentational side, yes. You know, what they should have done when they clocked, and I assume they knew, that Farage was going to hold these weekly press conferences in August, is get the team together in July and say, right, who are we going to put up week in, week out, and at least give the impression of purpose and clarity to counter Farage. None of that seemed to have happened. So there is a presentational issue. There's a much deeper one. It seems to me that this whole issue is the sort of second crisis of globalisation. We had the crash in 2008, which triggered a quite effective internationally coordinated response. Here, each government is trying to deal with this movement of people, which is the second crisis of globalisation, on their own, with claims of unilateral action which will work. The last government made claims it didn't work. This government's made claims it's not working. And it seems to me, we need a combination of initiatives from the government. I think Lionel's ideas are good, speeding up the process, getting them to work. But you've got to get international cooperation on this. And that's the difference with the financial crash. With this, everyone's pretending it can all be done individually. And clearly it's about movement between borders, which is going to continue, even if you manage to kick out some of these people. Yeah. And so, in the end, there's going to have to be some level of international coordination.
The most potent, and you're right about the levels of migration. I think this week the United Nations put the number of global migrants at 300 million, more than ever before.
Yeah.
But at the heart of the political conflict, Jo, is this simple question: who is the government for? Is it for these guys who've just turned up, or is it for us? Every leader seems to be unable to answer this question, except Farage, who's completely clear: it's us.
And he's putting out ideas and suggestions that even if, quite frankly, under great scrutiny, some of it doesn't work, he is at least throwing something into the debate and having, almost sort of sparking the conversation as to what the answers would be, and is very squarely saying, I'm putting myself on the side of you, the great British public who pay their taxes and work hard or whatever. That's where he's saying, I'm gonna put my flags, as it were. And the challenges that the government, as I say, have just been seemingly absent.
Well, there's another constituency, Trevor, that you didn't allude to, which is the community of those who believe unequivocally and 100% in international law. Now,
Yes.
what if that is not relevant? And I thought Bridget Phillipson's answer to your question that somehow if we withdrew from these conventions or made changes, that this would damage prospects for a trade deal. I mean, really? There are all sorts of reasons why countries would want to trade with us or sign a new agreement. Got nothing to do with whether we're part in or out of international conventions.
OK, well, it sounds like you're giving the government this morning... It's not
Bit of
even
a kicking.
It's not even a C grade, really, is it? I mean, I know what it is now, but they've failed. All right, look, it is 9 o'clock. You're watching Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. In the last hour, the Education Secretary has told this programme that the government needs to balance the rights of asylum seekers and local people. Bridget Phillipson said she was ashamed at the state of child poverty in this country, but the government was taking more action to tackle it. Well, I can speak now to the Reform UK Deputy Leader, Richard Tice. Good morning, Richard.
Good morning.
Everybody's talking about you. Let's start with the leader of the Church of England, who says that your policy on asylum is isolationist, short-term and knee-jerk. What part of that is wrong?
All of it's wrong because our policy on asylum seekers and removing those who are here illegally is to look after the people that the British government is supposed to look after, which is the British people, and to make them more prosperous, to improve the quality of public services for British citizens. And you've now got a government that's basically admitted the opposite is true. They're more interested in protecting the rights of people who've come here illegally, therefore they are criminals, than looking after the rights of British citizens. That's the dividing line, and that's why the latest poll shows that at 35%, we're 15 points ahead of a disappearing Labour Party.
Well, let's not argue about individual polls. There's no question that you guys are ahead, but is there a problem, though, for you that this is a clear statement of policy, but credible governments make agreements with other parties internationally? What you're basically saying is, in the end, what matters is what we want for our people, and deals that we might have made over periods of time with the United Nations, with other countries in Europe, with others, they can all go by the wayside because we need to get re-elected.
So are you suggesting that a 70-year-old, out-of-date, unfit-for-purpose agreement is more important than actually looking after the interests of the British citizens today? Let me tell you, that is such an out-of-touch
I'm suggesting that when you
attitude,
make a promise...
and that is why we're leading the polls and why the Westminster class is so out of touch with how furious people are.
I'm suggesting that when you make a promise to a partner, whether it be another individual or another country, you need to keep it. Or if
for
you
as
want,
long as it works for a government and our citizens.
Or if you want to change it, you have to get that...
You give due notice.
You need to do that
You give
with
due
agreement
notice. That's the
rather
point
than
of an agreement.
unilaterally.
You give due notice. So if it's 6 months' notice, we give 6 months' notice. It's just the same as in a business contract. When you're renting a property, you come to the end of the
You're never
lease.
going to do business with people who suddenly turn up and say, by the way, we've changed our minds.
No.
You are never going to do that.
What you do is you do business on the basis of the laws and the notice period for an international agreement. Most international treaties have an exit clause, a termination clause. Frankly, if they don't, then that's negligent in itself. Let's go back to the key point. This government seems to have forgotten that it is elected to look after the interests of the British people and to make us more prosperous. And if it abandons that duty, frankly, they should give up and call a general election.
Are you saying to the Archbishop, essentially, keep your nose out of politics?
Look, I'm a Christian. I enjoy the church. I believe in God. But no, the role of the Archbishop is not actually to interfere with international migration policies that is determined by the government.
But it is his job to tell us what he thinks and what the church thinks is morally right.
Correct. That's very different from international migration policy.
And don't governments have some responsibility to demonstrate moral behaviour, or is it just a business transaction being in government?
It's a bit of both, but fundamentally...
No, you can't have it both ways.
It's not an either-or, but fundamentally, I repeat, the role of the government is to make people better off, to improve our public services, to improve access to housing, and by removing hundreds of thousands of people who are here illegally will ease the pressure on the housing market, will ease the pressure on the labour market, and that'll lead to higher wages. Because currently, with give or take 1 million people illegally potentially working in the UK, that is suppressing British wages with a huge black market.
All right. Can I just ask you to talk about one thing clearly? You want your councillors to object to the presence of asylum hotels in their areas, and you said pursue legal means. Can you be clear with us that there is no encouragement from your party to the sort of person who want to break into asylum hotels in masks and to intimidate asylum seekers?
Of course. What a ridiculous suggestion, Trevor.
It's not a ridiculous suggestion.
It is a ridiculous suggestion.
Well,
we have consistently said...
Frankly, Trevor,
that is outrageous.
Let me finish. Whether it's ridiculous or not, I want to give you the opportunity to say it's ridiculous. That's the point of this interview.
Which is exactly what I'm saying. It's an outrageous suggestion. Of course we're not suggesting that. We've always suggested lawful, peaceful protest. Nothing else.
All right, let's talk about your broader plans on this area. You want to stop illegal immigrants landing in the first place. You've talked about deploying the Royal Navy. What would sailors' orders be? Would it be that they should sink small boats if they didn't turn back?
I think you might be suffering a little bit of August sunstroke, Trevor. Of course we're not saying sink boats. Get a grip. What's
the point of putting the Royal Navy out there?
The point of putting the Royal Navy out there is to act as a deterrent alongside our deportation policy, which will deter people from coming. Because everybody will know, if they land on these shores, they will be detained, they will be rapidly processed, and they will be deported.
This is very interesting. Most deterrents work because the deterrer is going to do what he or she says they're going to do.
And so if
you put the Royal Navy out there, what are they? Are they just interested observers?
Yes.
Hanging about?
In a sense, that's what the
Why
Border
are you
Force
wasting the Navy's time?
That's what the Border Force are currently there for. But they're acting as a taxi service.
Well, why are you wasting the Navy's time just out there having a look?
Assuming we're right, and we think we are, that our policy of deportations and detaining and deporting works, within weeks, the incentive to come here will finish.
So it doesn't matter whether it's Royal Navy out there or not.
Therefore, we enjoy the success that Australia had some 12 years ago when they had a pushback policy, and guess what?
But you're not answering my question. What is the point of putting the Royal Navy in the Channel if they are not going to take aggressive actions against the small boats?
It's all part
or any action.
It's all part of a deterrent. And do you know what you do? Just like in business, you make a decision, you try something. If it works, you keep pursuing it. If it's not working, you tweak, you adapt, you adjust. That's how you work in business, and that's how governments should run. And you try a variety of measures. We've put forward very clear plans. That's why we're leading in the polls, because people clearly understand if you're here illegally, you're going to be detained and deported. If you come here illegally on small boats, you're going to be detained and you're going to be deported.
You're going to put people in disused military facilities and then deport them to a third country. Are there any countries with whom you wouldn't do a deal? Afghanistan? Sudan?
We will look to do return deals with a variety of countries. And do you know what? Sometimes in business, you do business with people you don't like. If we want a ceasefire in Gaza, you've got to do a deal with the vile terrorist Hamas. If we want a ceasefire in Ukraine, you've got to do a deal with the vile monster Putin, OK? And if we want to return people to places like Afghanistan, you may have to do a deal with the Taliban. Sometimes things are difficult. Sometimes you deal with people you may not be best buddies with and go to the pub with.
With respect, you said 4 times that in business you do this or you do that. Well, you know, I'm also in business, but the truth is that there are things you cannot do if you are an elected government that you would do in business. So, just to be clear, there's no barrier from your point of view doing deals with countries. Their human rights records, the likelihood of people being tortured and so on, it makes no difference. You would not, for example, you would probably then have to resile from the Refugee Convention, would you?
We've already said, Nigel was very clear last Tuesday, that we will essentially derogate from whatever international treaties are necessary in order to make this policy effective. Because once again, let me be 100% clear for everybody. We have to look after the interests of the British citizens. We're not responsible for every monstrous, despotic regime all over the world. We're responsible for British citizens.
Our conduct, aren't we?
We're responsible for British citizens and to make us more prosperous.
And
I'll tell you why I use the word business,
for who we decide are our friends and our relationships.
If we keep spending more than we're earning right? We're going to go bust as a country in the same way that businesses go bust.
All right.
That's why the 30-year gilt yield is rising to completely unsustainable levels.
OK. Elon Musk says that the British government has declared war on the British people. Over the top or fair comment?
Mr Musk enjoys free speech, and sometimes he might be over the top, sometimes it might be fair comment. In a sense, what he says is not relevant to me or us. We're focused on what's right for the British people.
All right. Can I ask you about something else that the Archbishop has talked about, and that's the two-child cap on benefits. I think you would scrap it. Is that correct?
Yeah, we want a child benefit system that encourages more British families, more British births, because we've got a demographic problem at the moment. But equally, we need a welfare system that gets people back into work and stops people making the lifestyle choice of essentially deciding not to work.
So you scrap it. You scrap it. Can I just ask you if you would agree with Gordon Brown's way of paying for getting rid of it, which is essentially a sin tax, gambling tax?
We agree with Gordon Brown on probably zero, although he does agree with me, for example, on not paying voluntary interest on the Bank of England's printed reserves. But look, we'll decide how to pay for it in our way. That's the reality.
Oh, so you're not ruling out a gambling tax?
We're not setting a policy for a budget in 4 years' time after the next general election that we win. On your show, however brilliant
You've already done that on child benefits, Kat. You said a policy. So why not on this?
Because you're asking a very specific to link something directly.
OK. You complain when we don't take you seriously, and now you're complaining when I'm asking you what you do as government. Anyway.
Wonderful to see you.
Richard Tice, thank you for your time this morning. OK, back to our panel. Lionel Barber, Joe Tanner and Steve Richards, who I should mention has a new biography of Tony Blair coming out this month. OK, so now for the plug, you have to do some work.
Next month, September.
What do you think the conventional parties have to do to tackle the approach that Richard Tice has just outlined, which is, if nothing else, crystal clear?
Well, you see, it is an interesting example of... I think it reinforced the point I was making, to be honest, after the Bridget Phillipson interview, which is you can claim to do all these things unilaterally, and yet when each of the unilateral policies are interrogated, they start to fall apart. I mean, you asked Richard Tice what role the Navy was going to play, and it wasn't at all clear. You ask him separately on this child benefit thing.
I think it's pretty clear. They won't play any role except watching.
Absurd. So it's not an answer, in other words. It's not an answer, and they claim it to be part of a solution. And so the other parties must much more confidently interrogate these proposals. As I say, they should have been up every week in August, challenging, with a self-confidence and a sense that there is an alternative route. Now, that alternative route, the problem with it is it's complicated, and there aren't easy answers. But clearly, this attempt to suggest over August from Reform that there are easy answers fell apart in a 10-minute interview. So you, I'm not claiming you're a representative of all the other parties, but you showed one route of dealing with it. It's not the only route. Perhaps none of it matters in the current political climate, but I suspect in the end it will. Scrutiny.
Lionel.
Long on description, very short on prescription. In other words, a lot of very inflammatory language. So all these people who've come on boats or in this country, the asylum seekers are criminals. He also suggests that everything is very simple because it can be just treated, and you pick this up, it's just like a business. Well, running a government is not like running a business. It's extremely, it's completely different. And he also suggested that there are 1 million people, he used the word potentially, working in this country or could work illegally. I mean, this is highly inflammatory.
I think what he means is that there's probably about 1 million undocumented migrants. That's one of the estimates that's floating about.
Yeah, I'd love to know where that number came from, but there we are. So, as Steve says, the mainstream parties, they need to be much more rigorous and smart about tackling this empty-answered reform UK agenda, because otherwise the description as opposed to the prescription is leading to a bump in the polls.
Joe, whether or not the Tice answers are legitimate, the Tories are having a torrid time dealing with it, aren't they?
I think everyone's having a difficult time with it because to the points we've just raised and what I said earlier is that you've allowed a narrative to develop. And what's happening is in pubs and over breakfast tables and in newspapers and on forums online, people are saying, well, what Reform are saying, well, it sounds very simple. That sounds possible. Why aren't they doing that? And instead, it's great that you're having that scrutiny and you're asking those questions. But what's just happened for the last few weeks when everyone else has kind of started to think through these things and thought that the suggestions seem quite reasonable, they seem possible, and they're against a backdrop of a sort of plan that is non-existent from not only Labour but also the other main parties. The Tories are constantly saying that everything else is wrong without really taking responsibility for why we're where we are anyway. But also, you know, these photo ops and sitting on boats and saying, look, isn't it all terrible, doesn't answer any of the questions as to how we get out of where we currently are. And it doesn't stop people from getting angrier and angrier and angrier. And they will have watched you lock horns just now with Richard and thought, well, why are you having a go at him? He hasn't done anything wrong. It's not his fault that we're where we are. And Nigel's trying to come up with some ideas. And that's what people are thinking out there. People are saying, at least they're having a go. And Richard's point is valid, but I think a bit scary for the public, which is in business you try things, some things work, some things don't.
Well,
I'm a bit worried about some of those gambles on our behalf. I think they are dangerous, but at least they are trying to put something into the debate.
Yeah, I'm not going to be looking at my social media feed for a while, but but Steve, the thing that consensus is forming here is that the other parties are not really stepping up to the reform challenge. You know, you're all clever and so on, but people in government must be able to see exactly the same thing. What are the tensions, do you think, inside Labour at the moment that prevent them from tackling this head-on?
Well, we've talked about the presentational side, and I just don't think they're very good at communication, and that's a big, big problem. There's partly an argument to be won through communication. On the policy matters, it is really interesting. So Keir Starmer is someone absolutely committed to the ECHR, or was. We've heard Bridget Phillipson confirm they're looking at revisions to it. But that's one example of a very big internal issue. Whether you can win an argument by saying you're looking at revising through international agreement with others, the ECHR, or whether you have to go much bigger, just almost in presentational terms, and say, look, they've won this argument now. And so that's one of many internal tensions. But there's a more fundamental one, which is how the heck do we deal with this? And that's causing huge internal pressures.
Well, actually, you
the
can
answers
see
aren't clear.
You can see as one measure of how important the government thinks it is. Here are the Prime Minister's 93 official posts in August 2025. The biggest number by far is on migration. He never stops talking about it, but actually, it's not landing, is it?
Well, some of the tweets are absurd in his
So, for
name.
example?
I am removing 30 boats today. I mean, it's sort of trying to make personalised. He's not doing it himself. Someone's doing it. And some of them are darkly comic, and I'm not at all surprised they're not landing. But sorry.
The idea that this country's borders are porous, that we are not capable of enforcing border security is utterly corrosive and deeply dangerous to the democratic fabric. It really is. And therefore, the government has to show, and it has to think about presentation, but it has to find a way of communicating tangible progress in reversing this trend. It's not just about the boats in the Channel. That's an easy photo shoot. It is also about, as I said, processing asylum applications so that the system has to be galvanised And that it needs to be much more rigorous. Get these things done so that we can then deport.
But that's the fault of this.
And it really
this
is a big problem.
generally,
It's
isn't
a
it?
big problem. They can't show tangible progress.
Yeah, the storytelling of what started with this plan and where they've got to in a year is still, we are going to do things, not that we've done things. And what they have done feels like incremental progress.
And they
if
need
anything.
money to speed up
Yeah.
the processing.
We will come back and talk about that a bit later. Next, we'll bring you that exclusive interview with the Archbishop of York.
Fire, shouts the commander. There's a dash to safety.
We've now got to wait inside the shelter to see if there is incoming.
I'm Deborah Hames, Sky Security and Defence Editor. Should Russia's war with Ukraine escalate significantly, pilots like these could be called upon to go into combat for real.
Hear that whistle and that crunch? We know that they're coming from the south of the city where there's a column of Russian armoury. I'm Alex Crawford and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
Look at that sheet of flames, and that has happened within minutes, and now it's coming from both sides and it's moving this way.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos, analysis up at 6%. Podcasts, watching us live.
Joins us live.
All in one place and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace. The end of the political stalemate, the start of a new chapter for Northern Ireland. Catholics and Protestants now facing the same threat.
If we both contract COVID-19, religion's nothing.
Sky News, the full story first.
The Archbishop of York has criticised Reform and its leader Nigel Farage in an exclusive interview for this programme. He called their plans knee-jerk and said they offered no long-term solutions on asylum seekers and their removal. The acting head of the Church of England also called on the government to lift the two-child cap on benefits. But let's talk about the issue that you have raised with a letter that's signed with other faith leaders about child poverty. What is the point of what you're trying to say?
Well, at its simplest, it is simply a shameful scandal that in a wealthy country like ours, there are children every day, I mean thousands of children every day, going to school hungry, don't have a proper mattress to sleep on, have all the stigma and the life-limiting impacts of poverty. It shouldn't be this way, which I know everyone agrees on. It shouldn't be this way. But at the moment, I don't believe we have the holistic, systemic approach to addressing it, which is needed. So I've been here today in Middlesbrough speaking with various people who are involved locally in addressing the needs of child poverty, to learn about what's happening and to hopefully be a voice to say we can do better.
The Child Poverty Action Group says that there are more than 100 children pushed into poverty every day, 100 extra children pushed into poverty every day, and they attribute the largest cause, I suppose, of child poverty to this two-child limit. Now, the government says it was going to produce a strategy on child poverty. It was meant to come in earlier this year. They say it's going to come before the end of the year. How much does it bother you that actually, with this extra number, 100 plus, going into child poverty every day, that strategy has been delayed?
Well, it's hugely frustrating and it's deeply shaming for us as a nation. I've been speaking this morning about some of my own direct experiences with communities and schools that I serve here in the north of England, across, particularly here in Teesside in Cleveland. I was at a school last year where, the children come to school with an empty lunchbox. I used to send my kids to school with a lunchbox. It was my job to make the lunch in the morning. The kids go with an empty lunchbox because there's a breakfast club at the school. Virtually all the children at the school are on free school meals, and then at the end of the day, they set up a trestle table in the playground with the local food bank to give children, that's when they fill up their empty lunchbox, they take it home so that they can have some tea. Now, we know that the two-child limit is one of the contributing factors to growing child poverty. Therefore, it is that policy that is creating that situation. Now, I know these things cost money, of course they do, but the cost of not doing something, the economic difficulties we're storing up for ourselves by, listening to people this morning, they said over and over again, you only get one childhood, and if we don't invest in those children, if they don't have enough to eat, that has a direct impact on their education and their educational achievement, and therefore a direct impact on what that child's life is going to be like as an adult, which will end up costing us even more money.
You've been working with the former Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, on this. Mr. Brown says that we should pay for this by a new tax or further taxes on gambling. More generally, because this is your bailiwick really, do you think that there's a case for extending and increasing what people call sin taxes, taxes on things that are bad for us, gambling, alcohol, sugar, and so on?
Yeah, so obviously I speak to you as a church leader, not a politician, not an economist, but I hope I'm not naive in the way I look at these things. I think my primary role is to take a moral and ethical argument about, in a wealthy society like ours, we should not be accepting of such high levels of poverty, and we should address it. Obviously, that needs to be paid for, and I think we do need to be open to fresh thinking about how that happens. And so I'm really interested in Gordon Brown's proposals. The two which I think are the headline ones are, I think I'm right in saying, we have the lowest levy on gambling amongst European nations. So that is obviously something we could and should look at, and I would have no trouble in supporting that. But he's also mentioned, we, the people of this country, bailed out the banks in 2008, 2009, whenever it was. They are now making record profits. This is about what kind of society do we want to be, what are the values that underpin it, and how do we all make our contribution?
There's another territory on which that issue of what kind of society we want to be, what our values and so on, is very hot, let's put it that way at the moment. That is the issue of migration and particularly asylum seekers. Can you understand that some of the people that you minister to feel resentful that perhaps the interests of people who haven't grown up here and haven't contributed and so on yet are being put before theirs?
Oh yeah, I absolutely can. Not least a single mum with 3 children who's being penalised for having that 3rd child. Of course I understand that. But it's what is the solution? The solution isn't to stigmatise asylum seekers in the same way it's not the solution to punish and stigmatise single mums with 3 children. The solution must be to look at what are the causes of these things and to address those in a holistic, long-term way.
Well, that's true in the long term, but this weekend there are people in asylum hotels, and there have been people last week, in the last week or two, outside saying, not in our village.
I understand that, but the reason that happened this weekend is because of long-term failures to address the long-term issues that lead to people seeking asylum. And, I make no apology for saying we need a big, holistic, and in this case, international vision for saying, why is there the mass migration of peoples across our world at the moment? We know why. It's because of climate change. It's because of conflict. It's because of lack of international development and investment. These are the things that drive it. It's also a lack of safe routes for asylum seekers into our country.
So what's your response to those people who are saying policy should be, you land here unlawfully, you get locked up, and you get deported straight away, no ifs, no buts?
Well, I'd say to them, you haven't solved a problem, you've put it somewhere else, and you've done nothing to address the issue of what brings people to this country. And so, if you think that's the answer, you will discover, in due course, that all you have done is made the problem worse. So, don't misunderstand me. I have every sympathy with those who find this difficult. Every sympathy, as I do with those living in poverty. But I don't think we should, we should actively resist the kind of isolationist, short-term, knee-jerk, send them, in this case, send them home.
Is that your message to Mr Farage?
Well, it is. I mean, Mr Farage is saying the things he's saying, but he is not offering any long-term solution to the big issues which are convulsing our world, which lead to this. And I see no other way.
Let me just finally talk to you about the Church's moral authority. Has it been undermined by the controversies over safeguarding? You yourself have been called on to resign by one of your fellow bishops last year because of what she said were your failings in this area. But essentially the point is, does the Church still retain the moral authority to be a credible witness on these issues?
So I know that the Church has been shamed and humbled by our failings, particularly these failings we're talking about in areas of safeguarding. And I want to take every opportunity to apologise to victims and survivors and those whose confidence in the Church has been knocked by those failings. But a core value and a core belief of the Church is of humility, penitence, and the belief that all of us can be better than we are, all of us can start again, that there can be change. And we have been humbled by our failings, but I believe it can make us a more humble Church. And I do believe that I want there to be a society where there is accountability, but where there is also the opportunity to learn and start again. So the Church of England and many other denominations, and indeed many other institutions, have learnt so much in the last 20 years in these areas. That learning goes on, and I want to say sorry for my personal failings in this part, but I also want to say clearly that I am learning and I am determined to be part of the change that will rebuild the trust that I know has been knocked and sometimes broken in the last year or so.
Archbishop, thank you.
Thank you.
We were speaking in a multi-bank warehouse in Middlesbrough where the Archbishop was meeting leaders of anti-poverty charities. Now, up next, we'll get further reaction to that intervention by the Archbishop from the Conservatives.
Gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos, analysis up at 6%. Podcasts, watching us live.
Joins us live.
All in one place and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Let's speak to the Conservatives now. I'm joined by the Shadow Cabinet Office Minister, Alex Burghart. Morning.
Morning, Trevor.
Do you agree with the Archbishop that those who are making the case for immediate detention and deportation are isolationist, short-term and knee-jerk. And are you, the Conservative Party, guilty as charged?
Look, I think it's very clear to everyone watching at home, watching your show, Trevor, that far too many people are coming to this country illegally, that there needs to be full, adequate deterrence to prevent that from happening, and that we, under this government, we don't have that. And that's why the Conservatives have been very clear under Kemi that, if we get back into power, we will make sure that anyone who crosses the Channel illegally, tries to get into our country illegally, is deported.
You didn't do that before, did you?
No.
Why should anybody believe you can do it now?
No, we didn't succeed in that. But if you look at the work that Chris Phillips and Kemi have done since Kemi took over, you'll see that they've now put together a very comprehensive legal answer to how we solve these problems. And that goes much further than the last
Just as a matter of
Conservative
interest,
government.
how come she and Chris Phillips, who was also in government at the time, didn't get rid of the asylum hotels when they were in power?
So what we were, as you know, Trevor, because you follow these things very closely, what was happening under us was that we were trying to find a very firm deterrent, which was offshore processing in Rwanda. By the time at the end of our term in office, we had gotten to that point, but Labour coming in immediately scrapped it.
No,
and now they're seeing the consequence.
You're doing the same thing that they do. You've leapt to blaming them for something that you could have done when you were in office.
The reason I'm blaming them, Trevor, is because we now have much higher crossings than we have ever had before. And that is because the people who are running the smuggling gangs have seen that this government is a soft touch. And consequently, things are only going to get worse under this administration. We have put forward very firm legal proposals that would solve this problem, and the government needs to take account of them.
Joe Tanner on the panel was saying earlier on that one of the problems that the Conservative Party has right now is that you still haven't truly acknowledged the mistakes that you made. Why can't you just say on this question, on the asylum hotels, why can't you just say we blew it?
I think it's entirely wrong to say that we haven't acknowledged mistakes, and it's very.
I'm asking you to acknowledge a specific one, and which you've now decided was wrong. Why can't you just say that?
So the mistake that we made, I think, was that we did not go far enough on overruling human rights legislation that was binding the hands of the last government and preventing them from taking the tough action that was absolutely necessary. I think by the end we'd actually gotten to that point, and the general election prevented that legislation from being implemented. The Labour Party came in, they scrapped it. We have now put forward very clear legislation that would solve this problem. And it's clear that this government isn't going to do it. This problem is going to get worse. They are going to need more hotel spaces, not fewer. And we're going to see this problem across the country get much worse.
Have you decided that you want to get us out of the European Convention on Human Rights?
As you know very well, Trevor, because we've spoken about it before, we have a very senior KC, Lord Wolfson, looking at all of the legal intricacies of this problem at the moment, because it is not simple, it is not straightforward, and anyone who pretends it is hasn't looked into it. And when we get that report, you will be one of the first people to hear exactly what our proposals are. But to be clear, the purpose of this exercise is to make sure that there will be no legal obstacle to us solving the problem of illegal migration in the Channel. There will be no legal obstacle.
So, by the way, it's a privilege to be first to get this information. One of the first, OK. You say that to all the girls. But look, the point I really want to ask is, as a matter of principle, if it is possible for you to withdraw the UK from the ECHR, is it your view that we should do that?
If that's what's necessary, we will do it.
Your leader's written to councils, Tory-led councils, to keep going, to oppose the presence of asylum hotels in the court. I want to give you the chance just to be clear that there's no encouragement from your party from the sort of person who wants to break into asylum hotels and
No, of course not. And people have an absolute right to peaceful protest, and certainly on this issue, Epping's very, very close to my constituency. I completely understand why people are angry about what's happened there. I'm angry about what's happened there. But there is a line. We don't resort to violence in our protests.
One of the reasons I'm asking you that is that Epping Forest District Council's complaint is in theory about a planning violation.
Yeah.
But in practice, are you sure it isn't because they and you just don't want people in the Bell Hotel walking their streets. The leader of the Broxbourne Council, and another one of yours, told my colleague Jonathan Samuels yesterday that, and I'm quoting him here, we don't want these people walking around the area.
So, as you know, Trevor, there's a very serious allegation made against one of the people who was in the Bell Hotel. Following that, the council wrote to the Home Secretary and said, please will you shut this down?
There are allegations against three men. Does that justify smearing the other 135?
So the Bell Hotel is on the High Street in Epping. It is right in the centre of the community. There are people in the area feel worried and unsafe, and the council asked the Home Secretary to close it down. She declined, and they therefore looked for legal routes in order to be able to close that hotel. And they will continue. I hope they will continue that legal battle, because I believe very strongly that Yvette Cooper and the Labour government is putting their obligations to asylum seekers above their obligations to local people, and I don't think that is acceptable.
So your problem's not really about planning. Your problem is these men, you think, are dangerous.
The problem is that there are people in Epping who don't feel safe and should be able to feel safe in their own community, and a legal window has opened up for the council to be able to force the Home Secretary's hand. She has chosen to side with the asylum process and not with the people of Epping.
All right, just very briefly, last point. Church of England used to be known as a Tory party at prayer. The Archbishop of York says that it's shaming to keep the two-child cap on benefits, and your policy is to keep it. Do you feel ashamed?
No, absolutely not. I think that people who are on benefits should have to face the same choices as people who are in work. I don't think that an incredibly expensive extension to the welfare system is what the British people want or can afford at this moment in time. But even outside of that, I think in principle, we shouldn't just be endlessly extending welfare.
Alex Burghart, thank you for your time this morning.
Cheers, Trevor. Thanks.
In just a moment, we'll hear once again from our panel.
I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We'd been warned that we would meet people in the lowest moment of their lives.
Their story is one of fundamental American failure. Well, a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club, but I have to say there are more media here than there are supporters.
We love Trump!
I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too. This is just the audience that Joe Biden wanted.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
You know, it's easy to go to politics.
But it's important, it's at the heart of the issue.
For all the talk of a toned-down, humbled Trump, yes, maybe there was just a little less rhetoric, a little less divisiveness, but in the end it was the same rhythm, the same speech, the same man.
All them people that died in Russia and Ukraine, they'd still be alive today if Donald Trump was president.
If it was my wish, have a businessman that's strong like Trump, but maybe just doesn't say as much, you know?
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What we've been allowed to see over here is a humanitarian corridor, free wherever you get your news.
A young American medical student is making remarkable things happen.
I've seen a lot of difficult things, and honestly, it breaks my heart. These children don't deserve that.
I don't think there's a single Arab I know who isn't seriously disturbed by what's going on.
And so they gathered for this wonder of nature.
I'm very excited right now.
This is an extraordinary moment beyond anything I could have expected. Sky News, get the full story first.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Fire, shouts the commander. There's a dash to safety.
We've now got to wait inside the shelter to see if there is incoming.
I'm Deborah Hames, Sky security and defence editor. Should Russia's war with Ukraine escalate significantly, pilots like these could be called upon to go into combat for real.
Hear that whistle and that crunch? We know that they're coming from the south of the city where there's a column of Russian armoury. I'm Alex Crawford and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul. Look at that sheet of flames, and that has happened within minutes, and now it's coming from both sides and it's moving this way.
Back to our panel, Lionel Barber, Joe Tanner and Steve Richards. Joe, what did you make of the Archbishop's intervention, particularly on the child poverty issue?
I think he raised some really interesting points, and he repeatedly, I know that the conversation comes back time and time again to an issue of the benefit cap and whether that's the answer to everything. And he kept repeatedly saying about a holistic approach being needed. And I think that sort of sums up where we are as a country, really, that there's a series of holistic approaches that are needed on a lot of the big challenges that we've got. He was very clearly saying that, yes, that was a factor, but it wasn't the answer to everything. And it does often come down to a suggestion of, well, if actually you reverse that policy, is that going to suddenly solve everything? It clearly isn't. There is much more there's much more underneath why we've got the serious situation of poverty. And, you know, a few years ago, I was a school governor, and we used to have, as chair of governors, actually, we used to have a problem of attendance, and we had problems of, you know, dirty uniforms or kids in sort of ill-fitting uniforms. And that was a sign of the fact that things were maybe difficult for some families. But it's moved on so far to the point where children are not being fed properly before school and even in school. So the stuff he's talking about is a genuine sign of a growing problem, but it's not an easy fix.
Lionel, it's a curious situation here where the party that wants to get rid of the two-child cap is Reform.
Yes, very, very interesting. I don't see whether Richard Tice was in favour of a sin tax, a gambling tax, or indeed a bank levy that the Archbishop of York. So he was holistic, but he got pretty prescriptive. Look, this is a serious problem, but it's going to cost $2.5 billion a year at least by 2030, maybe 3.7 billion a year. We've got other commitments too. So the only way of tackling this, and this is why it was so damaging, what happened earlier this year, in the government's retreat on welfare reform. I mean, you've got to look at this overall. The Institute of Fiscal Studies is very clear that this can be done, but it has to be done within an overall envelope.
OK, against the background that we've been talking about, really, is the decline, as much as anything else, of Labour's electoral fortunes. So if we look at our regular polar coaster, big feature, Reform has led every poll since April. I mean, that's extraordinary. Governing party down to 20%, and there are all four parties in it. Steve, this is new, isn't it?
Yeah, although we should remember at the general election, it was very interesting. Reform had MPs, Greens got a few MPs, the Lib Dems got 70 MPs. So the two-party hold, which, remember, was very big in the 2017 general election. I think the Labour and Tories got the biggest share of the vote since the 50s. That's broken. Now, the big question is, for how long? Is this a sort of permanent thing? Is it like the SDP in the early 80s, which rose in a similar... If you had a chart in the early 80s, the SDP would have been...
Yeah, there was a time when the SDP was 40,
way more than Reform.
Yeah.
So not entirely new, but it's a massive challenge. And the child poverty thing we've just been discussing is one example of this. So Reform can say, yeah, we're going to lift the cap, no explanation as to how. You have Bridget Phillipson in, she's reviewing child poverty in government, desperate to lift that cap. With Gordon Brown, Keir Starmer wants to lift it, but they are the ones who have to find the money. And the big question for this budget is whether it would just be tax raises to please the OBR and balance the books, or whether they will have money to do things like this as well. And without it, you can see this continuing for some time. The big question is for how long. I certainly think next summer's elections in Scotland, Wales, local elections, this will be the scene with profound consequences.
Well, it's interesting that the Labour plus Conservatives, actually, if you look at it, I think we think that this is a small, put together, it's a smaller share than Jeremy Corbyn won in 2019. 2017. We are eventually, I think, Joe, going to return to talking as well as about migration, about the economy, and looming large is Rachel Reeves's budget. Right now, it looks like there's no win for her here, is there?
No, and it also looks like they're floundering a bit because there's been all this kite flying. And if it was for every kite they've thrown up, not one would have been able to fly because there's so many of them in the air at the same time. They're all sort of getting tangled up. So it's not been a great spectacle, to be honest, in terms of the way that they're sort of addressing this. And the feeling that there isn't anyone with a really solid hand on the tiller, that even the run-in to the budget is looking pretty precarious, to be honest, that it's becoming
the mechanics of getting it done.
Just the narrative, the lack of narrative from the government, but also the growing concerns about what's going on with the gilt markets, the sort of growing narrative that we are heading into a pretty challenging time, and that everything is sort of so delicately balanced. The list of things that needs to be funded is growing, but actually the list of options just looks pretty all over the place.
20 seconds, Nigel. Lionel, what's you got to do?
Nigel, I'm not Mr. Farage. Hold on. I mean, I'm ahead of the...
Sorry about that. Sorry about that.
Original sin was to say we're not going to increase income tax, VAT and national insurance. Terrible mistake, boxed her in. She's got no margin of manoeuvre. Second, she should have relaxed or reinterpreted the fiscal rules last year. Now, she's in a box.
Thank you. That is it for this week's show. We've got a great autumn ahead. See you next Sunday.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos, analysis, up at 6%. Podcasts, watching us live.
Joins us live.
All in one place, and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.